Publishers have to put a colossal amount of money into the budget of every single game that they re-release and bring back. We're talking $350,000 plus just to bring back like one Super Famicom game. So you end up in this situation where publishers are sitting on hundreds of games that are just never going to be re-released unless somebody provides a solution to easily re-release those at no cost to that publisher or developer, whoever owns the rights to that software.
Josh has this idea of looking at like untapped potential from development resources and untapped potential in the market. And I just have this kind of idea like, wow, this is a really cool way to bring a lot of forgotten games kind of back into this accessible space for people that only really want to play games that are available on a modern platform. So, we both started talking about it and it kind of got left in this place where we're like, well, let's look and see what we can do. And I started doing some research and started reaching out to people to see, is this something that we can actually do? And if we're going to do it, can we do it the right way?
I went to Joe with a naive idea that it would be an emulator within Unity. And Joe immediately slammed that idea and said that's going to be inefficient. The games are going to run like garbage. They're going to have lag.
It was immediately that I was like, this is not an option. But I took ideas of like, how can we recreate that development environment specifically in a way that's fast, affordable, and focused on retro games in an extremely accurate way. I kind of knew immediately I'm not the right person to do the actual programming for this. While I have a really great eye for retro games and I know what I'm looking for, what they should sound like, what they should feel like, what the end product should be in a modern world, I wasn't the right programmer for the job. So I started looking around at a lot of different people that I knew in the community.
And he said, hey, I found this guy on YouTube who ported Diablo to Switch for fun. And I'm like, okay, if this guy has ported Diablo to Switch for fun, he knows what he's doing and he enjoys it.
I found that extremely interesting. I also knew from his past, he was very into emulation, ported a lot of emulators, worked on a lot of emulators. So I reached out to Dimitris, got a conversation going with him, asked him how interested he was in kind of working on Game Boy, writing a Game Boy emulator from scratch. Because at the time, I kind of knew what our first game could be if we were gonna get this going.
I jumped at the opportunity because this was kind of going to be my first real job in the video game industry other than kind of working on hobbyist homebrew projects. So I accepted the position pretty much immediately, and once we had signed all the paperwork and kind of the NDA stuff was all out of the way, I was told that the first game that we were going to be working together on is bringing back Shantae, the original Game Boy Color game, to the Nintendo Switch.
Every Shantae game was on Switch except for the first one. And it just felt like this glaring absence in the overall library, and I felt like we needed to correct that. And it's also a game that was extremely valuable and desirable and had only previously been re-released on 3DS.
It's almost like there was never really a question. As soon as this conversation became a serious, we are actually gonna do this, green light it thing, Shantae was the game. There was never anything else that we looked at.
Joe and myself spent many months really kind of fine-tuning the engine, A/B testing with original hardware, making sure that the audio sounded good, that it wasn't laggy, and making sure that the input latency was as low as possible. I was very nervous to kind of show Matt Bozon, obviously the creator of Shantae, and I remember he sent an email back saying, this is amazing, you guys have knocked it out of the park, and everything just feels exactly the same way as the original game did on the Game Boy Color.
Then this opportunity came up to do River City Girls Zero.
One of the things that stands out to me the most working on Super Nintendo is bringing in Kevin Armstrong. So he worked with Dimitris on porting Ares to all these different consoles that we were going to be releasing River City Girls Zero on. You get acceptable results in a lot of other ways, but to us, like, acceptable wasn't acceptable. We had to get as close to perfect as we possibly could.
So Kevin and I have worked together previously on some homebrew projects going all the way back to the original Xbox. In fact, we worked together on the Final Burn Alpha port to the OG Xbox, going back all the way to 2002. So I was familiar with his skill set.
And then we brought Audie on to start looking at finding more opportunities for the Carbon engine, but also to lead these projects and shepherd them through development.
I really wanted to create these interactive museums, these archival releases. The idea should be, this is so good, this is so essential, this is so complete, that even in the prospect of bringing it to a new system in the future, we don't need to touch it because we've already done the work that should be done.
There's a shared idea with pretty much everyone on the Carbon team that we all care a ton about not just the games and making them accessible and making them, play well, fun, whatever. We care about presenting the story about the games. And we all kind of collectively feel the best way to tell those stories is alongside the software you're trying to tell the story about.
I want to help preserve games by making them more accessible and available, by bringing these retro games into Carbon Engine onto modern platforms, both physically and digitally.
Randy Linden is literally a legend.
A couple of the programs that I'm known for early on is the 64 emulator. That was a Commodore 64 emulator that was written for the Amiga. I did Dragon's Lair for the Amiga. I did Doom for the Super Nintendo. And I also wrote Bleem and Bleemcast for the Dreamcast.
He's someone that actually kind of pioneered emulation. So here was this complete circle for him to come back with us. Like, hey, you pioneered all these things. You were the one who helped make this a viable commercial solution.
I am very fortunate to have been a programmer now for almost 40 years and had a lot of options to choose where it was that I was going to be working. And I chose limited run games because it's a perfect fit. Their love of retro gaming, their embracing of emulation and technology, it just fits exactly with my background and history.
If you don't understand what emulation is and you don't know that this was an old Super Nintendo game, you should never question that this is just a game that's running on your Switch, PlayStation, Xbox, whatever it is.
I think it's awesome to be able to come into Carbon and kind of go deeper into the games than I did as a kid, because a lot of times I'll have to double back and go to the original hardware and see does this match?
Here, you don't have source code. So how do I communicate with this game in a way where I understand when a level has been changed or a certain thing has been collected so that we can actually, inject code into those parts and run functions like, hey, launch a trophy when this flag goes off in memory or things like that. It's really complicated.
I didn't really realize how many things you just kind of take for granted as just working.
Localizing River City Girls 0 was a huge undertaking because we localized it in ROM. It's not like text that's injected over top. And every time you do something as simple as change the amount of pages in a chat window, you can break all kinds of markers that are causing cutscenes to load or story events to trigger. It's not something you can just dig through the code and learn how it works. So you have to approach it from a completely different way.
Look, the team and the engine itself is going to be here for a long time, and I'm very much here for the ride. I can't wait to kind of show you guys what we're working on and what the future holds.
Trip World is an experience-based platformer for Game Boy, which was led by Ueda-san. He was one of the main programmers on most of Sunsoft's classic titles, but this was kind of his brainchild.
Trip World is one of those games that Sunsoft created in the 90s and then never brought to America for whatever reason. Maybe it's too cute, but it sets the high watermark for classic Game Boy audio and visuals.
I was actually brand new to Trip World when it was announced internally that this is one of the games we're going to be doing. And while I didn't have any familiarity with it before, the base I understood was well, this is a game that didn't come out in the States. That's why I didn't play it. I don't really know much about it. But I do love Sunsoft, especially Sunsoft games from this era.
It's not based on a property. It's not based on anything else but just pure, unfiltered Sunsoft.
It sticks with you because it looks and sounds great, but also it just feels like you are taking part in, a world. Like there is more to the game world than just your character beating up bad guys.
Artistically, it does incredible things with the Game Boy to convey a sense of space that a lot of other Game Boy games couldn't even dream of doing to the same extent.
If you look at the Game Boy, generally a Game Boy game will be simplistic. It will have a strong main sprite and a background that's suggestive. You will see maybe a scattering of pixels that should be a mountain and a cloud. But in Trip World, the parallax clouds go over a huge mountain range. And so you have this beautiful illustration in dot matrix form.
It's one of those games that really pushes the Game Boy to its limits without technical issues, without breaking it. It's always very smooth and it reads really clearly on the Game Boy screen. It still looks good today. And the music is top notch. It's, Sunsoft always produced great music for their games, and this is no exception.
It's one of the fullest soundtracks you can find on the Game Boy. The stereo separation is bar none the best of any Game Boy game. When you look at like Wikipedia or something, the overview will tell you that it is kind of like a platformer, a very straightforward platformer. To me, it is much more of an experience game. And what I mean by that is everything in Trip World is much more related to being in Trip World.
Even though it looks like a standard platformer, there are a lot of systems and a lot of elements to the game interacting with each other that don't necessarily reveal themselves or make themselves obvious the first time you play, and just kind of leave you wondering, like, what's all of that about?
It's not completely action focused, and it's interesting to see how you can kind of approach playing it, because you can kind of play it in a couple different ways. You can attack the enemies that are around, or you can just completely ignore them and walk past, and some don't even affect you or hurt you in any way, and it makes you think, like, did they want the player to choose, am I going to be someone who destroys everything, or am I going to be passive? It's interesting to see that that's possible.
Most American gamers have never laid eyes on it before. They've never really had a chance to play it. And the fact is, it's become extremely expensive and highly desirable. The European release and the Japanese release both.
As a collector, I noticed that it was right behind Shantae in terms of being one of the most bootlegged Game Boy games of all time. And then I looked at how much the real copies were worth, and I was like, okay, that's why it's being bootlegged. The real European copies sell for $3,000 in box. When a game is that expensive, there's a clear demand for people to play it and experience it, which just made it a really great choice and selection when we started talking to Sunsoft about what games we could work with them to re-release.
They've been one of my favorite partners of all time to work with in my career, because they've just been so open, and every time we presented something to them, it's not just like, okay, cool, thanks. They're really, really engaged. They give great feedback. Ueda-san, he really gets what he did. When I asked the technical question, he knew exactly what he had done and why he had done it. When we talked about him about something aesthetically, some kind of effect on screen with frame blending or anything like that, he knew exactly why he had done it and could explain it to us. And it just so happens that he's also super kind. He's just really a cool guy. Ochi-san, the guy who runs Sunsoft today, gave us unlimited access. He opened the archives in Nagoya for us. So we have all the design documents, we have a full music player with some arrangements even, but most importantly, we have Ueda-san, the original director, came in and was like really happy to see us give Trip World its second chance. And so he consulted on the design, on the presentation, and he even took part in the project himself.
What I think is really cool about Trip World DX is that it kind of fits the pedigree of everything we care about with Carbon, and that's, paying respect to the game as it was, contextualizing it in an interesting way, but then also potentially expanding on the game, modernizing the game in a way that doesn't compromise the integrity of the original game.
What could we do to kind of fulfill this vision of Trip World based on those original design documents? Because there was some mentions of color. I figured that the one thing that we could do is this. So what you're looking at here is the full colorization of Trip World. This was a monumental undertaking because the way we did this was that we contacted a friend of mine named Ivan, who goes by Torres. He's someone that has kind of excelled at reverse engineering Game Boy games and including a full compatible palette that works with the Game Boy Color. He has to constantly reverse engineer the game to make sure that it runs properly on the hardware and not crash, not do a call up it's not supposed to. We managed to get Ueda-san fully involved, and actually what you're seeing is the original color palette that he had in mind for an official Trip World DX back in the day. So this is not just us coming into the game and saying, this looks pretty good, right? This is actually Ueda-san's official palette. He tested every single aspect of the game.
A lot of these older games were produced on a time crunch or with limited budgets, and as someone who made a game myself, I know that I would love the opportunity to go back to that game I made and fix all of the things that I know could be fixed with it in hindsight. So I think it's this amazing experience to get to go back to these developers and creatives and give them that opportunity to revisit their classics, to make adjustments, to make changes based on decades of hindsight.
This is the creator's vision. This is what he saw, or this is what he would have seen if he'd had that technology available.
We're actually putting out an officially licensed cartridge with Trip World DX fully compatible with the Game Boy Color hardware. Jake Silverman, known as Button Masher, was really interested in working with us, so we asked him to maybe do an arrangement for a new title screen and general menu layout, and he nailed it within, I think it was 5 hours that we asked and got the final file.
I mean, for me personally, the most exciting thing is just having Trip World available affordably.
It is as authentic as it was right out of the box years ago.
Everything we did about the approach to Trip World DX, I think demonstrates how spot on our vision is for how we want to approach these projects and how we want to respect these games in the future.
So we've got a lot of really amazing projects on the slate for Carbon Engine that are going to be revealed slowly over the course of the next year. And I'm really excited to announce them because some of them are going to be legitimately surprising, legitimately shocking to people. They are games that people have been asking for and clamoring for since the start of Limited Run. So it's amazing to finally get to tap into some of these things and re-release them.
The future of Carbon for me is very bright. Not only does the team continue to expand, we're bringing on new people that are very much excited about emulation and retro games.
Things like Mega Drive, arcade, and other platforms.
Computer emulation such as the Spectrum, the Amiga, the IBM PC.
Carbon is great because it represents an attempt to bring a lot of different systems, an increasing number of systems, to modern platforms. And there's a lot of genuine talent and experience behind the technology there, but also a lot of passion for the licensing side of things. People who really know their stuff both technically and in terms of what's a great game, what's an interesting or notable game.
Limited Run makes dreams come true, so we actually work on games we dreamt of working on our whole lives together. So it makes me incredibly emotional to talk about these guys because it's just a dream come true.
In this moment, it's really hitting me just like how much of a dream project and job that I have. It happens so naturally and so fluidly that it's just all felt like the right fit, the right thing. I'm constantly excited about what we're doing in the future. I think some of the things we're doing now are finally starting to truly shape the potential of not just the software we're building, but the team that we have. And the things we have coming down the line, I think, are really going to surprise and excite a lot of people.
There was tons of stuff, hundreds of games on each platform that never came over from Japan. And these are great games. And we have an opportunity now to take those games, translate them inside of the ROM and re-release them on modern platforms, and finally give them that English release that fans have dreamed about since the 90s.
This allows us to actually kind of more directly interact with a lot of these Japanese studios, a lot of these Japanese directors, and kind of figure out not just on a surface level, like, well, we want a collection, we want this, this, this. I can actually kind of sit down with them. It's like, what is it that you really wanted to do with this game back then and now? What can we help you kind of realize with this new re-release?
We're losing history on a daily basis, and it's a shame that there isn't a wider spread acceptance yet of the fact that we're losing this history. And everybody at Limited Run Games feels the exact same way about both preserving history and enhancing it.
I don't claim to be the be-all, end-all place for game preservation. I don't think that what we are doing is necessarily preserving these games 100%, but I think we are a component within game preservation.
We're not just a company now that works on physical products. We're also a company that makes games, and we know what we're doing, and we have a really great team of people that are working on those games as we speak.
It's nice to finally be where we are because this kind of was a long process of kind of getting some momentum, and we're working on games on a daily basis and watching those games become actually playable and shipped and printed games, which is wild.
I can tell you some exciting and spectacular things are coming from limited run games.